Welcome to ObscuraTime, where forgotten stories find new life and hidden history is brought into the light. Today, we journey to the Horn of Africa, to a land of rugged mountains, ancient churches, and unbroken pride. A land that resisted what nearly every other African nation couldn't. A land that said no to empire. This is the story of how Ethiopia was never colonized. Let's begin. The year is 1896. Europe is deep into the scramble for Africa. An era where colonial powers, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, were carving up the continent like a cake. By the end of it, almost every part of Africa had fallen under foreign rule, except for Ethiopia. Now this wasn't luck. Ethiopia didn't slip through the cracks. It was an empire, organized, independent, and proud. It had kings, it had armies, it had diplomacy, strategy, and most of all, history. And leading it was one of Africa's most brilliant leaders, Emperor Menelik II. But to understand how Ethiopia pulled off the impossible, we need to go back even further. This isn't just a story of one battle, it's the story of a civilization. Thousands of years earlier, long before most European countries even existed, there was the kingdom of Aksum. Aksum was a powerhouse of the ancient world. It traded with Rome. It battled Persia. It minted its own coins, built massive stone obelisks, and adopted Christianity as early as the 4th century. Yes, Ethiopia is one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. Its rulers trace their lineage back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Their capital cities echoed with chants in ancient Ge'ez. Their mountain churches were carved from solid rock. They saw themselves not as a colony waiting to happen, but as a kingdom in their own right. So when European powers came for Africa in the late 1800s, Ethiopia didn't panic. They prepared. Menelik II became emperor in 1889, but even before that, he'd been watching. He saw how European nations tricked African leaders with treaties written in confusing language. He saw how advanced weapons could tip the scales, and he knew one thing for certain. If Ethiopia was to survive, it had to modernize fast. So he got to work. Menelik opened diplomatic channels with France, Britain, and Russia. He bought rifles and artillery. He built roads to move troops faster. He trained his armies. He centralized power and strengthened his alliances across Ethiopia's many regions. And standing beside him, his wife and co-strategist, Empress Taytu Betul. Taytu wasn't just a queen. She was a general, a politician, a fierce defender of Ethiopian sovereignty. She founded the capital city of Addis Ababa, and she would soon take command on the battlefield herself. But first came the deception. In 1889, Italy signed a treaty with Ethiopia, the Treaty of Wuchale. The treaty existed in two versions. In the Italian version, Ethiopia had supposedly agreed to become a protectorate, a state under Italian control. But in the Amharic version, the one Menelik signed, there was no such agreement. Italy had tried to sneak in colonial rule through a language trick. When Menelik realized this betrayal, he was furious. He immediately denounced the treaty. He told the world Ethiopia would never be anyone's colony. Italy didn't back down. Determined to claim a piece of Africa, Italy mobilized its forces and invaded. They believed their modern European army would crush any resistance. They had no idea what was coming. Menelik issued a call across Ethiopia, and Ethiopia answered. Tens of thousands of warriors marched to defend their homeland. From every corner of the empire, they came. Oromo, Amhara, Tigray, Guraj, Muslim and Christian, nobles and farmers. It wasn't just an army, it was a nation. By the time battle approached, Menelik had gathered over 100,000 troops. Italy had around 17,000, but numbers weren't the only advantage. Ethiopia had the terrain. They knew the mountains. They controlled the high ground. They fought for their land, their people, their history. The Italians, on the other hand, were poorly mapped, overconfident, and divided into columns. And on March 1st, 1896, at a place called Adwa, it all came to a head. The Battle of Adwa was one of the most decisive military victories in modern African history. Ethiopian forces swept through the Italian lines. Entire units were destroyed. Thousands of Italian soldiers were killed or captured. Their commander, General Baratieri, fled the battlefield in disgrace. It wasn't even close. Menelik's army had done what no one thought possible. They had defeated a modern European power. The world was stunned. Across Europe, there was shock and embarrassment. In Italy, protests erupted. The government collapsed. But in Africa and the African diaspora, it was a moment of joy. In black communities in the Americas, people sang songs about Ethiopia. In the Caribbean, children were named after Menelik. Pan-African thinkers saw Ethiopia as a symbol of what was possible, that Africans could resist, that dignity could be defended, that the chains of empire were not inevitable. Shortly after the battle, Italy was forced to sign the Treaty of Addis Ababa. It formally recognized Ethiopia's independence. No tricks, no backdoors, no fine print. Ethiopia remained free, but none of this happened by accident. Menelik had played a long game. He had studied the world, modernized his kingdom, built alliances, and stood firm in the face of empire. And beside him, Empress Taytu had led troops, rejected deceitful diplomacy, and proven herself one of the most powerful women in African history. Their victory at Adwa was more than a battlefield win. It was a declaration that Africa was not passive, that African agency was real, that unity, strategy, and courage could defeat even the most powerful invaders. But this wouldn't be the end of Ethiopia's fight. Decades later, in the 1930s, fascist Italy returned. Under Mussolini, Italian forces launched a brutal invasion, using modern weapons, tanks, even chemical warfare. They occupied Ethiopia, but they could never conquer it. Ethiopian resistance continued in the mountains, in the villages, and in exile. By 1941, with the help of Allied forces, the Italians were driven out. Once again, Ethiopia reclaimed its freedom. And once again, the world was reminded, this was not a land that could be broken. To this day, the Battle of Adwa is celebrated across Ethiopia, a moment of national pride, a symbol of African strength, a reminder that freedom is never given, it is fought for. And so Ethiopia remains, uncolonized, unconquered, and unbowed. This is ObscuraTime, where we honor the forgotten, the fierce, and the free. If this story moved you, imagine how many others are waiting to be told. Follow ObscuraTime for more hidden truths, lost legacies, and powerful untold histories. Until next time, stay curious.